Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of the gun was cold against my temple, but not nearly as freezing as the realization that the monster threatening to tear my throat out was the same boy I had tucked into bed a decade ago. "Look at me, Julian." The voice rumbled, a baritone growl that vibrated through the mahogany floorboards of the study. It wasn't the voice of a child anymore. It was the command of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. I kept my eyes fixed on the chaotic sprawl of paperwork on my desk, my breath hitching in my throat. The pheromones in the room were suffocating, a thick, oppressive scent of burnt cedar and ozone that signaled an alpha on the verge of a feral snap. My own scent, the muted, carefully suppressed aroma of a recessive omega, was trembling in response, betraying a biological terror I hadn't felt in years. I said, "Look at me." A hand, large and scarred, slammed onto the desk next to my face, shattering the crystal inkwell. Black ink splattered across my cheek like blood. I slowly lifted my gaze. Standing over me was Kalen. At 22, he was a titan of muscle and repressed violence, his tailored suit straining against shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the underworld empire I ran. His eyes, once the color of frightened honey, were now burning gold, the pupils blown wide in a state of absolute, predatory obsession. "I am not your father, Julian," Kalen whispered, leaning down until his lips brushed the shell of my ear, his hot breath sending shivers down my spine. "I never was. And I am done pretending that I don't want to break you. To understand how the leash had snapped, you have to understand why I put it on him in the first place. 10 years ago, the city of Oakhaven was a cesspool of rain and neon, divided strictly by biology and bank accounts. I was Julian Vane, the 30-year-old head of the Vane Syndicate. To the public, I was a philanthropic beta businessman. In the shadows, I was a recessive omega who had clawed his way to the top of the criminal food chain by being colder, sharper, and more ruthless than any alpha. I found Kalen in the gutters of District 9. It was a night where the rain fell like shards of glass. My convoy had stopped because of a body in the road. My driver, a burly man named Graves, had stepped out to kick the obstruction aside, only to recoil with a scream. The obstruction was a boy, no older than 10, skinny as a rail but fighting with the ferocity of a hellhound. He had bitten through Graves' shoe. I lowered the tinted window, the damp air rushing in. The boy looked up. He was filthy, covered in mud and motor oil, bleeding from a gash on his forehead. But his eyes, they didn't hold a shred of fear. They held a promise of death. "Interesting," I had murmured, stepping out of the car. My shoes, Italian leather worth more than the boy's entire life, splashed into the puddle. "Boss, stay back," Graves warned, clutching his foot. "It's a stray. Probably diseased," the boy hissed, baring teeth that looked too sharp for a human child. He was an unpresented pup, but the latent power rolling off him was unmistakable. He was going to be a dominant alpha, a king class. I crouched down, ignoring the mud staining my trousers. "You have fire, little one. But fire without a hearth just burns itself out." The boy stopped hissing, tilting his head. He sniffed the air, catching my scent beneath the heavy blockers I wore. He didn't attack. He simply collapsed forward, exhausted, into my arms. I took him in. Not out of charity. I didn't believe in charity, but out of investment. I needed an heir, a weapon, a shield. I named him Kalen. I gave him the finest education, the best combat training, and the luxury of the Vane estate. I became his guardian, his mentor. I thought I was raising a son. I was arrogant. You can dress a wolf in silk, you can teach it to use a knife and fork, but you cannot teach it to ignore the moon. The shift began subtly, around his 20th birthday. Kalen had grown terrifyingly fast. He stood 6'4", looming over me. He stopped calling me sir or father and started calling me Julian. I ignored it. I was busy fighting a war against the rival Liu family, who were encroaching on our shipping lines. I needed Kalen to be my enforcer, my iron fist. And he was perfect. He dismantled our enemies with a terrifying efficiency, returning home with blood on his hands and a serene smile for me. But the way he looked at me changed. It wasn't the adoration of a child anymore. It was heavy, calculating. The incident that shattered our precarious peace happened the night of the solstice gala. The Vane estate was filled with the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light over velvet tuxedos and silk gowns. I stood on the balcony, nursing a glass of champagne, feeling the headache that always accompanied these social farces. "You look tired, Julian." I turned. Lord Harrington, a slimy alpha from the banking sector, was encroaching on my personal space. He smelled of cloying musk and expensive cigars. "Just thinking, Harrington," I said, stepping back. "Business never sleeps." "You need to relax," Harrington purred, his hand reaching out to stroke my arm. It was a condescending gesture, one alphas used on betas they deemed beneath them. "Maybe you need a partner to help shoulder the burden. A beta like you shouldn't be alone." Before his fingers could graze my sleeve, a shadow fell over us. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harrington froze, his instincts screaming at him to flee. Kalen stepped out of the shadows. He was wearing a black tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, his dark hair slicked back, exposing the sharp, aristocratic lines of his face. But his expression was pure, unadulterated murder. "Remove your hand," Kalen said softly, "or I will remove it for you." Harrington sputtered, trying to summon his alpha bravado. "Now see here, boy, I was just..." Kalen moved faster than the eye could follow. One moment he was standing 3 feet away. The next, he had Harrington by the throat, lifting the older man off the ground with one hand. Harrington's feet kicked uselessly in the air, his face turning purple. "Kalen, put him down," I hissed, scanning the room to see if anyone had noticed. Thankfully, we were in a secluded alcove. Kalen didn't look at Harrington. He looked at me. "He touched you. He's a business associate. Put him down, Kalen. That is an order." For a second, I thought he wouldn't listen. The defiance in his eyes was new, dangerous. Then, with a sneer of disgust, he dropped Harrington. The banker crumpled to the floor, gasping for air, and scrambled away like a frightened rat. "You caused a scene," I snapped, turning on Kalen. "What has gotten into you?" Kalen stepped closer, invading my space in a way he never had before. He didn't apologize. He reached out, his thumb brushing the fabric of my suit where Harrington had almost touched me, as if wiping away a stain. "You smell distressingly sweet tonight, Julian," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "Are your suppressants failing?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I slapped his hand away. "That is none of your concern. Go to your room. We will discuss this in the morning." "I am not a child you can send to your room," he growled, the alpha timbre in his voice making my knees weak. "I am the one keeping the wolves from your door. Perhaps you should remember that." He turned and walked away, leaving me trembling on the balcony. It was then I realized the truth I had been denying. My suppressants weren't failing because of the quality. They were failing because my biology was reacting to him. That brings us back to the study, to the ink on my face and the gun on the desk, not pointed at me, but placed there by Kalen as a statement. Asterisk, I could kill you, or I could claim you. The choice is yours, asterisk. Why are you doing this? I managed to say, my voice steady despite the fear. I raised you. I gave you a name, a life, and I am grateful, Kalen said, walking around the desk. He moved with the grace of a panther, silent and deadly. But gratitude is not what I feel when I see you across the breakfast table. It is not what I feel when I smell your scent on the sheets. He stopped behind my chair. I couldn't see him, but I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He placed his hands on the back of the leather chair, leaning down. Do you know what they say about dominant alphas found in the wild, Julian? He whispered. We imprint. Once. And we are possessive beyond reason. I am 12 years your senior. I argued, grasping at logic like a lifeline. I am your guardian. It's twisted, Kalen. Social constructs, he dismissed. The beast inside me doesn't care about years or titles. It only knows that you are mine. You have been mine since the moment you picked me up out of the mud. He spun the chair around, so I was facing him. He felt at his knees between my legs. The sight of the most dangerous man in the city kneeling before me should have made me feel powerful. Instead, it terrified me. Because he wasn't kneeling in submission. He was kneeling in devotion. The kind of devotion that consumes everything in its path. Kalen, stop, I pleaded, my resolve crumbling. If we do this, there is no going back. The Vane family, the board, they will destroy us. Let them try. Kalen snarled, his hands gripping the armrests of my chair, trapping me. I will burn this entire city to ash if they try to take you from me. He buried his face in my lap, inhaling deeply. You smell like rain, he murmured, his voice muffled against the fabric of my trousers. Like the rain that night. You saved me, Julian. Now let me save you. Save me from what? I asked, my hand hovering over his hair, trembling. I wanted to push him away. I wanted to weave my fingers into his dark locks. He looked up, his eyes lucid and terrifyingly serious. From a life of loneliness. From pretending to be made of ice when I know you burn just as hot as I do. Before I could answer, the heavy oak doors of the study exploded inward. Splinters of wood rained down on us. Kalen was on his feet in a microsecond, his body shielding mine. A deafening roar of gunfire erupted. The Liu family. They had made their move. Stay down. Kalen roared, pulling a handgun from the holster at his hip. He didn't look like the boy I raised. He looked like the god of war. 3 men in tactical gear stormed through the smoke. Kalen didn't hesitate. He put 2 bullets in the first man's chest and 1 in his head before the assassin could even raise his rifle. The second man lunged with a knife. Kalen caught his wrist, snapped the bone with a sickening crunch, and threw him through the shattered window. The third man, the leader, aimed his weapon at me. Time seemed to slow. I reached for the gun Kalen had left on the desk, but I was too slow. Kalen wasn't. He threw himself in front of me just as the gun flashed. The impact knocked him backward into me, and we both crashed to the floor behind the heavy mahogany desk. Kalen groaned, a guttural sound of pain. Blood blossomed on his white shirt, just below the shoulder. Kalen! I screamed, the icy mask of the crime lord shattering completely. I'm fine, he gritted out, his teeth stained with red. Stay? Behind me. He raised his gun over the edge of the desk and fired blindly. A thud followed. Silence descended on the room, broken only by the settling dust and Kalen's ragged breathing. I scrambled to him, my hands pressing against the wound. The blood was hot and slick. You idiot, I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. You foolish, reckless child. Kalen laughed, a wet, wheezing sound. He reached up with his bloodied hand and cupped my cheek, smearing crimson across my pale skin. Not a child, he rasped. Say it, Julian. Say I'm not your child. I looked at the bullet hole in his shoulder, then at the fierce, unwavering love in his eyes. He had taken a bullet for me without a second thought. He had killed for me. He would die for me. The barrier I had built between us, the wall of guardian and ward, crumbled under the weight of his blood. You're not a child, I whispered, leaning my forehead against his. You're a madman. You're madman, he corrected, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. You're alpha. I didn't argue. I couldn't. The biological imperative, the sheer emotional weight of the moment, broke the last of my resistance. I leaned down and kissed him. It tasted of iron and smoke and desperation. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it was a seal. A contract signed in blood. When we broke apart, Kalen's eyes were heavy, but triumphant. Finally, he breathed. Don't get cocky, I said, my voice trembling as I ripped off my tie to bind his wound. We have a war to win. We've already won, Kalen murmured, his eyes slipping shut as the adrenaline began to fade. I have you. Everything else is just collateral damage. The weeks that followed were a blur of violence and restructuring. With the Liu family's failed assassination attempt, the truce was over. I unleashed Kalen, and he tore through the city like a hurricane. But the dynamic in the Vane estate had shifted irrevocably. Kalen recovered with the supernatural speed of a prime alpha. I spent my nights not in my own room, but in his, tending to his wound at first, and then simply existing in his space. The taboo of it still lingered, a ghost in the hallways. The servants whispered. The board members exchanged glances. He adopted him, they said. It's unnatural. I didn't care. One evening, a month after the attack, I sat in the library, reading a report on our new territory acquisitions. Kalen entered, fully healed, wearing a silk robe that hung loosely off his broad frame. He didn't speak. He simply walked over to my chair, took the report from my hands, and tossed it into the fireplace. I was reading that, I said, though my heart rate had already spiked. You've worked enough, Kalen said. He extended a hand. Come. To where? To bed. The command was simple, lacking the aggression of the knight in the study, but carrying 10 times the weight. It was the confidence of ownership. I took his hand. He led me to the master bedroom, my bedroom, which had effectively become ours. He pushed me gently onto the mattress, the silk sheets cool against my back. Kalen hovered over me, his golden eyes tracing every line of my face. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice low. Taking me in, I reached up, tracing the scar on his shoulder where the bullet had hit. "I regret not realizing sooner that I wasn't raising a son," I admitted softly. "I was raising my other half." Kalen's expression crumpled, the hard lines of the alpha softening into something raw and vulnerable. He lowered his head, burying his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling my scent, no longer hidden by suppressants. "I waited so long," he whispered against my skin. "I watched you for years, Julian. Untouchable. Perfect. Lonely." "I'm not lonely anymore," I said, wrapping my arms around his neck, pulling him down. He kissed me then, deep and slow, a claiming that went beyond the physical. It was a merging of souls, two broken pieces of the world fitting together to form something unbreakable. As the moonlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting long shadows across the room, the boundaries of the past dissolved. There was no guardian, no ward, no master, no servant. There was only the Alpha who had clawed his way out of the gutter to claim his prize, and the Omega who had finally found the strength to surrender control. And that is how the stray dog became the master of the house. If you enjoyed seeing Kalen take what was rightfully his, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, is it true love if you have to break every societal rule to have it? Or is some forbidden fruit simply too poisonous to eat? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art. 2 men, BL, Yaoi, man 1. Julian, mature, sharp jawline, elegant, wearing unbuttoned white dress shirt, black tie undone, looking up with mixed expression of fear and desire, slight blush, silver glasses slightly askew, brown hair. Man 2. Kalen, younger but larger, dominant alpha, muscular build, black hair falling over eyes, glowing golden eyes, wearing black suit vest over bloody white shirt, intense possessive expression, pinning man 1 against a mahogany desk. Background is dark Victorian study, shattered inkwell, black ink dripping on papers, scattered documents, gun on desk, moonlight through window, dramatic chiaroscuro lighting, tense atmosphere, intricate details, cinematic angle.